My father abandoned me on my wedding day for my sister's fake career party, but who took his place left him speechless. I never imagined the happiest day of my life would begin with betrayal. On the morning of my wedding, I should have been focused on my vows, on the man I loved, on the future we were about to build together. Instead, my heart was breaking. The one person I had dreamed of walking me down the aisle, my father, wasn't there. He hadn't been in an accident. He hadn't fallen sick. He had chosen not to be there, and the reason he gave was even harder to believe. My sister, Olivia, had scheduled a so-called success party on the very same day as my wedding. And my father, after promising me, after swearing he would be by my side, decided her party mattered more. I stood there in my gown, clutching my bouquet, knowing the man who raised me would rather toast Olivia's hollow victory than witness me start my new life. But what he didn't know, what none of us could have predicted, was who would step in to take his place. And the chain of events that followed exposed secrets buried for years, tore illusions apart, and forced my father to face a truth so devastating it still echoes through our family today. Before I tell you how it all unravelled, let me take you back to the beginning, to a time when our family looked perfect from the outside, when neighbours envied the life we lived behind that white picket fence. Because to understand the betrayal, you first have to understand the love I thought I had. From the outside, my childhood looked like a dream painted across a postcard. We lived in a quiet Pennsylvania neighbourhood, in a 2-story house framed by a white picket fence and a yard full of my mother's roses. Neighbours often said we were the picture of stability, the kind of family people aspired to be, and for a while, I believed that was true. My father, Gregory Parker, carried himself with a confidence that seemed unshakable. He worked as a financial advisor downtown, always dressed in crisp suits that made him look like he had stepped out of a magazine cover. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had the kind of presence that filled a room without him saying a word. Yet behind that commanding exterior, he had a smile that could soften anything. To me, he was larger than life. He was the man who taught me to ride a bike, who knelt beside me on the driveway as I scraped my knees, and who cheered when I finally found my balance. My mother, Diane, was the heart that kept everything together. She worked part-time as a nurse, but her true calling was the warmth she poured into our home. She baked cookies that could make the entire block stop by just to say hello, and she had a way of smoothing every storm before it ever broke. Her laughter, light and steady, filled the house with a calm that made me feel safe. Then there was Olivia, my sister 3 years older, and in many ways my opposite. She was tall, athletic, the golden girl with a voice that carried across every sports field she played on. Coaches adored her, teachers praised her, and while she basked in the spotlight, I was the quieter one. Petite, bookish, happiest when lost in sketching or writing. My mother celebrated those differences, telling us we were both unique in our own ways. But Olivia never seemed satisfied with sharing the stage. Even back then, I felt her eyes on me, sharp with jealousy whenever my father clapped a little louder for me, or when my mother framed another one of my drawings. Still, in those early years I clung to the good. Family dinners where Dad asked about our days, long summer evenings when Mum set up lemonade on the porch, the pride in my father's eyes when he placed my report card on the fridge. Those were the moments that convinced me we were unshakable. I thought the 4 of us were bound together by something indestructible, but perfection has cracks. They begin small, almost invisible, until one day the whole foundation gives way. For us, that fracture came when my mother fell ill, an illness that didn't just take her life, but slowly dismantled everything we thought we were as a family. The first crack appeared when my mother started to look tired all the time. At first I thought it was just her long shifts at the hospital, but soon it was clear something was terribly wrong. The woman who had once filled our house with energy and warmth could barely make it through the day without resting on the couch. Tests, hospital visits, hushed conversations, it all blurred together into a nightmare that refused to end. Then came the diagnosis: stage 4 ovarian cancer. The words didn't make sense to me at 12 years old. I clung to the hope that medicine could fix it, that doctors would work a miracle. But within 8 months, the laughter in our home fell silent. My mother slipped away one rainy evening, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were grieving. Grief does strange things to people. My father buried himself in work, leaving early in the morning and coming home long after midnight. It was as though if he stayed in the office long enough, he could escape the emptiness that waited for him at home. I, on the other hand, retreated, inward, into sketchbooks, into quiet corners where I wouldn't have to explain my sadness. Olivia, though, she saw an opportunity. At 15, she stepped into the void my mother left behind, announcing herself as the new caretaker of the household. At first I thought it was maturity. She cooked dinners, burned at the edges but edible. She reminded my father about bills and groceries, and he looked at her with a gratitude I had never seen before, as if she had rescued him from drowning. But, behind closed doors, that role became something darker. Olivia's words cut sharp. "Dad is already carrying enough. Stop whining about him not being home for dinner." Or, "You're so needy, Amelia. Can't you see he has real responsibilities?" It wasn't just her voice I heard. It was her version of me that she whispered into my father's ear. She painted me as selfish, dramatic, ungrateful, and the worst part was that he believed her. I watched the bond I once shared with my father shift into something unrecognisable. He no longer asked about my drawings or my grades. He began praising Olivia for holding the family together, while I became the invisible one in the room. If I pushed back, Olivia would twist my words until they sounded like disrespect. If I tried to defend myself, she'd tilt her head with practiced innocence and say, "I'm just trying to help." Slowly, the roles in our family rewrote themselves. Olivia became the golden daughter, the dutiful protector. I became the problem. The one who, according to her, never cared enough, never did enough, never was enough. And my father, blind with grief, let it happen. He clung to Olivia as the anchor in his storm, never realising she was pulling us both further apart. But the full weight of her manipulation, and the devastation it caused, didn't reveal itself until my teenage years, when one betrayal made me realise just how far she would go to erase me from his heart. High school should have been a time of discovery and freedom, but for me it became a battlefield I didn't even realise I was fighting on. By then, Olivia's grip on my father was complete. Every achievement I tried to share seemed to vanish the moment she filtered it through her own twisted lens. I still remember the art fair my sophomore year. I had worked for weeks on a large canvas piece, a city skyline at sunset, every window glowing like fire. My teacher pulled me aside the day before the showcase and whispered, "This could win the state scholarship." It was the kind of recognition I had dreamed of, something I wanted my father to see with his own eyes. I reminded him about the ceremony every night for 2 weeks. He nodded, distracted, but said, "I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it." The night arrived, and the auditorium was buzzing with families holding cameras and flowers. I scanned the crowd, searching for his tall frame, but the minutes ticked by and his seat stayed empty. When my name was called and the ribbon was placed in my hand, I stood alone on the stage, smiling for no one. Later, I found out why. Olivia had called him the night before and said, "Amelia's nervous. She doesn't really want you there. She asked me to tell you so you wouldn't feel pressured." And he believed her. Instead of cheering in the audience, he was at a business, dinner across town. When I confronted her after, she didn't deny it. She smirked, leaned against her doorway and said, "You always want to be the centre of attention. It's pathetic. Dad doesn't need to waste his time on your silly little drawings." That was just the beginning. She intercepted invitations, forgot to give me phone messages from my father, even told him once that I had skipped class to hang out with friends when in reality I was in the library preparing for finals. Each lie was a thread she wove into a larger story, that I was unreliable, careless, and undeserving of his time. The most painful part was that it worked. My father stopped asking questions about my life. He never saw the nights I stayed awake until 2 in the morning finishing projects. He never saw the quiet pride I felt when my teachers praised me. Instead, he saw me through Olivia's eyes, a girl who didn't care. The distance grew wider with every year. By the time I reached junior year, I no longer expected him to show up. I stopped leaving reminders on the fridge, stopped holding out hope he might appear in the crowd. I learned to sit quietly in the corner, pretending I didn't care when other parents clapped for their children. Inside, though, I cared deeply, and every absence carved another scar that I carried with me. By 18, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to spend my life living in the shadow Olivia had built for me. I applied to colleges as far from home as I could, desperate for distance, desperate to breathe without her voice poisoning every word my father heard about me. And when the acceptance letter arrived, from a university states away, it felt less like a beginning and more like an escape. But leaving home didn't mean leaving the damage behind, because what I found in college was more than freedom. It was the first taste of what real family felt like, and the first glimpse of a love that would one day collide with the family I had tried so hard to outrun. When I left for college, it felt less like moving into a dorm and more like stepping out of a prison I had been locked inside for years. The drive to New York was long, but every mile between me and my father's house felt like a chain snapping free. For the first time, I could breathe without Olivia's voice hovering in my ear, twisting everything I said or did. Campus life was overwhelming at first. Crowded hallways, professors who didn't know my name yet, the weight of building an identity on my own. But it was also liberating. No one there knew me as Gregory Parker's quieter daughter or Olivia's little sister. I was just Amelia. It was during my second semester that I met Ethan. He sat next to me in a literature elective, tall and easygoing, with a smile that could disarm even the most guarded person. He missed a lecture once and asked to borrow my notes. That simple exchange turned into coffee, which turned into 3 hours of talking about everything from poetry to engineering projects. With him, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years, and then came his family. Meeting them was like stepping into an entirely different world. His mother, Linda, was a kindergarten teacher with a way of making everyone feel special the moment they walked through her door. His father, Mark, was steady and warm, the kind of man who could tell a joke with a straight face until everyone was laughing. Even his younger cousins ran to greet me as if I had always belonged there, but the one who struck me most was Ethan's uncle, Robert. A retired literature professor, silver hair and sharp eyes behind wire-framed glasses, he carried himself with quiet dignity. He asked about my art, not in the polite way adults often do, but with real interest. He remembered details from our conversations, encouraged me to pursue my passions, and seemed to recognize the weight I carried even when I tried to hide it. It was in their home, around their crowded dinner table filled with noise and laughter, that I realized how starved I had been for belonging. They celebrated my small victories, an A on a paper, a new painting finished, as though they mattered. And in those moments, I finally understood what family could feel like when it wasn't poisoned by lies or competition. Still, as comforting as that new world was, the shadow of my old life never completely disappeared. Every holiday visit back, home reminded me of the gulf that had grown between me and my father, and the smirk Olivia wore when she reminded me, "I'm the one taking care of Dad. Don't forget that." For years I told myself I had outrun the past. But when Ethan proposed, and I called to share the news with my family, I learned just how wrong I was. Because nothing exposes old wounds faster than a wedding. Ethan proposed on a cool autumn evening in Central Park. The trees had already begun to turn, and golden leaves drifted around us as though the world itself was pausing to watch. He led me to a quiet spot by the lake where we had once sat as students, sharing coffee and dreams about the future. When he knelt down, his hands trembling ever so slightly, and opened the velvet box with a sapphire ring glinting in the fading sunlight, I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood, pure, unshakable joy. The moment was perfect. His family's reaction was everything I could have wished for. Linda cried and hugged me, as though she had been waiting her entire life for me to become her daughter. Mark shook Ethan's hand with pride, before pulling me into a warm embrace. Even Robert, who usually chose his words with precision, raised a glass at dinner that night and said, "Amelia, you've always belonged with us. This just makes it official." For the first time in years, I felt not only chosen but celebrated. Sharing the news with my own family, however, was another story. I called my father the next morning, excitement still buzzing in my chest. When he answered, I told him everything. The proposal, the ring, the way Ethan had planned the day around memories of our first dates. There was a pause, longer than it should have been, and then he said in a tone that might as well have been about a quarterly report, "Well, congratulations. He seems like a good man. Have you set a date yet?" No warmth, no laughter, no fatherly joy, just practicality, stripped bare of emotion. I hung up, trying to convince myself it didn't matter, but the ache settled deep. Olivia's reaction came next, and if my father's response stung, hers was like salt ground into the wound. She sent a text packed with exclamation points that rang hollow. "OMG, congrats, little sis. So happy for you. That ring is so pretty." I could picture the tight smile on her face as she typed it, the jealousy behind her words. At 31, she had cycled through flings and short-lived relationships, but commitment always slipped through her fingers. My happiness was a reminder of what she didn't have, and she couldn't hide it. For a moment, I considered pretending their reactions. Didn't matter. I had Ethan, and I had his family, and that was more than enough. But deep inside, I still carried a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the wedding could be the bridge that mended the cracks with my father. It was a hope that would grow stronger when I asked him to walk me down the aisle. And for a brief, shining moment, it seemed as though he might finally step back into the role I had always wanted him to fill. Once the engagement glow settled, the whirlwind of planning began. Venues, menus, flowers, dresses, details that could consume months felt less like a burden and more like a dream finally materializing. Ethan and I decided on a historic hotel in the city, its garden terrace perfect for a summer ceremony. Every weekend was booked with tastings, fittings, or meetings with vendors. Yet beneath all the excitement, one question kept circling in my mind. Would my father truly be part of this moment? I gathered the courage one evening during a phone call. My voice shook as I asked, "Dad, I was hoping, would you walk me down the aisle?" For a long moment there was only silence, and I braced for disappointment, but then his voice broke softly through the line. "I would be honoured, Amelia." For the first time in years, hope rushed through me. I imagined him waiting at the end of the aisle, his arm steadying mine, a symbolic bridge from childhood into a future I was building. It felt like maybe, just maybe, the wedding could heal wounds too deep for words. Olivia, on the other hand, declined my offer to be a bridesmaid. She claimed her work schedule was too demanding, though her tone carried that sharp edge I had come to recognise. "You don't really need me in your bridal party anyway. You've got plenty of friends," she said, as if it were a favour to be spared her presence. The truth stung, but I tried to ignore it. Ethan's family filled the spaces my own wouldn't. Linda came with me to dress fittings, tears shining in her eyes as I stepped out in lace for the first time. "You're going to be breathtaking," she whispered, squeezing my hands. Mark walked us through possible reception playlists, joking that he'd practice his dance moves in the living room. And Robert, always thoughtful, asked if I had considered writing my own vows, reminding me that words could be as lasting as the rings themselves. For months, I let myself believe that the fractured pieces of my family might come together on that one day. I saw the possibility of reconciliation in my father's agreement, even as Olivia hovered in the background, her smile too polished, her enthusiasm too rehearsed. I tried not to question it, telling myself she would show up when it mattered, but hope is fragile, and in our case it was about to be shattered. Because 3 months before the wedding, Olivia made an announcement that turned everything upside down and forced my father into a choice that would break me all over again. In the months leading up to the wedding, I started noticing little ripples of unease that I tried to ignore. Olivia's social media began to fill with cryptic posts, snapshots of hotel ballrooms, captions like "big things coming this summer," vague comments about catering tastings and milestone celebrations. At first, I assumed it was work-related. Real estate had always been her excuse for everything. Still, a knot of worry formed in my chest. One afternoon, I finally called her. "Olivia, what's going on? You keep hinting at some kind of event in June." Her voice came smooth, practiced. "Just a work achievement. Nothing you need to worry about." Then, with that familiar edge, she added, "You should focus on your big day. It's not like anyone's competing with you." Competing. That word echoed in my head long after we hung up. The truth came crashing down 3 months before the wedding. Olivia called me on a Sunday afternoon, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Amelia, I just wanted to let you know personally, before you see it online. I'm hosting my career celebration on June 15th. I finally hit my target to become a broker, and the firm is throwing me a huge party. Isn't that exciting?" My stomach dropped. June 15th, my wedding day. "Olivia, that's my date. You got the save the date card 8 months ago." She gave a fake gasp. "Did I? It must have slipped my mind. But don't worry, it'll be perfect. My event is at 11 in the morning at the country club. Yours is at 4, right? Dad can do both. It works out beautifully." Beautifully. The word stung like venom. The country club was nearly 2 hours from our venue. Even if he left the second her party ended, it would be impossible for him to arrive in time for the ceremony, let alone walk me down the aisle. That night. I called my father, hoping he'd see through her manipulation. "Dad, did you know Olivia scheduled her party for the same day as my wedding?" There was a pause before his answer, casual, dismissive. "Yes, she mentioned it. Unfortunate timing, but these work events are hard to move. It's a big achievement." For her. "I'll attend her celebration in the morning, then drive to yours." My voice cracked. "Dad, it's not possible. You can't be at both." "I'll make it work," he insisted. "Let's not make this bigger than it is." But in the weeks that followed, I could feel him slipping away. Phone calls grew shorter. He started asking if the ceremony could be delayed an hour, if photos could be rearranged, if I really needed him there at all. Each suggestion cut a little deeper, until I realised what was happening. Olivia had once again forced me into the role of afterthought. For a while, I clung to denial, telling myself he would choose me when the moment came. But 2 weeks before, the wedding. The truth landed like a knife in my chest. My father called, his voice clipped, almost businesslike. "Amelia, I've thought it through. I can't make it to your ceremony. Olivia needs me at her event. You'll have to find someone else to walk you down the aisle. I'll come to the reception." Reception. As if my vows, my walk down the aisle, my once-in-a-lifetime moment could be discarded like an optional extra. That night I broke down in Ethan's arms, sobbing until there were no tears left. My father had chosen Olivia. Again. And this time, it wasn't just about a school event or a forgotten dinner. This was my wedding. But if Olivia thought she had destroyed me, she was wrong. Because out of the wreckage of that betrayal came someone I never expected. Someone who would step in with a steadiness and grace my father had long abandoned. 2 weeks before the wedding, my phone lit up with my father's name. For a brief second, I felt hope. Maybe he was calling to reassure me, to prove that he still intended to keep his promise. But the moment I heard his voice, flat and heavy, I knew what was coming. "Amelia, I've been thinking about the timing. It just isn't possible for me to leave Olivia's event early and make it to your ceremony on time. She needs me there for the whole thing. You'll have to find someone else to walk you down the aisle." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I finally found my voice, it was barely more than a whisper. "So you're choosing her. Again." "It's not about choosing," he replied quickly, defensive. "It's about practicality. You'll understand when you're older. Maybe Ethan's father could walk you down. Or a friend's dad. It's the same gesture." The same gesture. As if the man who had once carried me on his shoulders, who had promised to be my hero, could be swapped out like a placeholder. I hung up and collapsed onto the floor, tears spilling uncontrollably. Ethan came home to find me like that, broken in a way he hadn't seen before. I told him everything, and he wrapped me in his arms, anger tight in his jaw. "You don't deserve this. He doesn't deserve you." For a moment, he suggested postponing. "We could move the date, Amelia. Give your father no excuse." But something inside me hardened. No. That's exactly what Olivia wants, for me to rearrange my life around her. I won't hand her that victory. Still, the wound was deep. I had dreamed of that walk my entire life, the moment my father would steady my arm, hand me to the man I loved, and silently tell the world I was cherished. Now that dream had been stolen, not by strangers, but by the very people who should have protected it. For days, I wandered in a fog, torn between grief and fury. Yet in that darkness, when it felt like no one could fill the void he left behind, a voice I hadn't expected reached out, offering not just to step in, but to remind me what family truly meant. A few days after that crushing phone call with my father, my phone rang again. This time it was Robert, Ethan's uncle. His voice carried a gentleness that disarmed me instantly. "Ethan told me what happened," he said softly. "I hope you don't mind him sharing. I just wanted you to know I'm thinking of you. Something." In his tone cut through the numbness I'd been drowning in. Robert wasn't the kind of man to intrude without reason. He let silence breathe, as though he understood how heavy my heart felt. Finally, he said, "Family disappointments leave the deepest scars. I know that from experience." I asked him what he meant, and after a pause he explained. His own father had refused to attend his college graduation because he thought Robert's choice to study literature was a waste compared to the family's construction business. "It was one of the most important days of my life," he told me, "and my father decided he couldn't support it. That kind of absence, it never leaves you." Tears welled in my eyes, not just for myself, but for him. For the first time, I felt someone truly understood the weight of my father's betrayal. I hesitated, but the question spilled out before I could stop myself. "Robert, would it be inappropriate if I asked you to walk me down the aisle?" There was silence, and then a tremor in his voice I'd never heard before. "Amelia," he said slowly, "I can't tell you what that means to me." "Are you sure? This should be someone very close to your heart." "I am sure," I answered, my voice steadier than I expected. "You've shown me more kindness and support in these few years than my father has in over a decade. It would be an honor if it were you." He cleared his throat, but I could hear the emotion beneath it. "Then I accept, with all my heart. Walking you down that aisle will be one of the greatest privileges of my life." For the first time since my father abandoned me, the crushing weight on my chest eased. Robert was right. Family wasn't always about blood. Sometimes it was about who chose to show up, and as the wedding drew closer, I held on to that truth. Because while Olivia was busy weaving her lies and my father was burying himself in denial, someone else was preparing to stand where he should have been, and in doing so, would change the course of that day forever. The morning of my wedding dawned bright and golden, sunlight streaming through the curtains of the hotel suite where my bridesmaids and I had stayed the night before. The air smelled faintly of hairspray, coffee and roses delivered for the bouquets. My friends buzzed with laughter and excitement, while I sat in front of the mirror in silence, watching my reflection transform. The makeup artist brushed powder across my cheeks, the hairstylist pinned white blossoms into my updo, but inside I wrestled with a hollow ache. I tried to remind myself that this was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. And yet, beneath the satin and lace, beneath the laughter and champagne, a part of me kept whispering, "He's not here. He chose her." Just before noon, there was a knock on the door. My bridesmaid opened it, and there stood Robert. Impeccably. Dressed in a dark tuxedo, silver hair neatly combed, he carried a small velvet box. His eyes softened when he saw me. "You look radiant," he said simply, stepping forward. I wanted to give you something before the ceremony. Inside the box was a delicate lace handkerchief, embroidered with tiny blue flowers. It belonged to my mother. She carried it on her wedding day in 1930. I'd like you to have it, Amelia. Something old, something blue. I pressed it to my heart, unable to speak through the lump in my throat. Then he reached into his pocket again and handed me a slender silver bracelet, a charm shaped like a paintbrush, crossed with a pen dangling from its chain. Linda asked, "Me to give you this." She remembered you once told her how you loved painting and writing. She thought you should carry that part of yourself into today. It struck me then how much more loved I felt by this family I had chosen than the one I was born into. The hours blurred as photographs were taken, bridesmaids zipped me into my gown, and guests began to arrive. By 3:50, I stood behind the glass doors of the garden terrace, clutching my bouquet so tightly my knuckles turned white. Through the panes, I could see rows of white chairs filled with our friends, Ethan's family, colleagues and neighbours. At the front stood Ethan, nerves written across his face, yet his eyes scanning the crowd for me with a devotion that steadied my breath. Robert approached, offering his arm. For a moment I hesitated, because this was the moment I had always imagined sharing with my father. But as I looked at Robert, standing steady, his expression full of pride, the doubt dissolved. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, my voice breaking. More than ready. The music began, soft notes of canon in D carried by a string quartet. The doors opened, and a hush fell over the crowd. Every step I took down that aisle felt like shedding the weight of years of neglect and betrayal. Robert walked beside me, with a dignity that needed no words. I glanced toward the empty seat where my father should have been, and for a flicker of a moment, pain stabbed through me. But when I lifted my eyes and saw Ethan waiting, his face lit with wonder and tears glistening in his eyes, gratitude swallowed the grief. When we reached the altar, Robert placed my hand in Ethan's and whispered so softly, I almost didn't catch it. He doesn't deserve this honour, but I am proud to give it. The ceremony unfolded like something out of a dream. Ethan and I exchanged vows we had written ourselves, promising to carry each other through storms and seasons. Laughter and tears rippled through the crowd when Ethan described me as his once-in-a-lifetime. When the officiant declared us husband and wife, the applause that rose was like a tidal wave, carrying every ounce of love in that space. The reception followed in a ballroom glittering with candlelight and music. Glasses clinked, guests danced, and speeches flowed. Mark welcomed me as his daughter with a steady, heartfelt toast. Linda's tears shone as she spoke about family being defined by love, not circumstance. And Robert, standing tall with his glass raised, gave words that silenced the room. "True family," he said, his voice steady, "is not bound by blood, but by choice. And today, I was honoured to stand beside Amelia as proof of that truth." There were tears at nearly every table. For a moment I forgot the absence, forgot the pain. I was surrounded by people who had chosen me, and that was enough. But happiness rarely lasts without interruption. Just as the night reached its peak, a shift rippled through the crowd. A murmur rose near the entrance, heads turned, and I followed, their gaze. Standing there in a hastily pressed suit, his face taut with discomfort, was my father. He was hours late. He had missed the ceremony, missed the toasts, missed the first dance. And as he stepped inside, gift bag in hand, I knew the peace of this day was about to be shattered. When my father walked into the ballroom, it was as if the air shifted. Conversations dipped, the band stumbled for a beat, and eyes followed him, as he crossed the room holding a small gift bag. He looked out of place, like someone crashing a celebration he wasn't meant to attend. He approached me stiffly, leaning in for a hug that felt more like a handshake. "Congratulations," he said. His voice was flat, as though he were acknowledging a co-worker's promotion, not his daughter's wedding. "Sorry I'm late. Olivia's event ran longer than expected." The words made my blood boil. He didn't even pretend to be regretful. He glanced around the room at the decorations, the half-eaten cake, the guests enjoying the last hours of the evening. "Looks like it was a nice wedding," he commented, as if observing a movie he'd arrived too late to see from the beginning. I forced a smile through clenched teeth. It was beautiful. Perfect, actually. For a while we stood in silence, and then, as though it had just occurred to him, he asked, "So, who ended up walking you down the aisle?" "Robert," I replied evenly. "Ethan's uncle." He frowned, his voice rising just enough for nearby guests to notice. "That older gentleman in the tuxedo. You had a stranger walk you down instead of waiting for me." Heat rushed to my cheeks. He's not a stranger to me. He has been more present in my life these last few years than you have. His face flushed. "That's not fair, Amelia. I've always supported you." Something inside me cracked open. Years of swallowed pain surged to the surface. "Have you? You missed my scholarship ceremony because Olivia told you I didn't want you. There. You forgot my graduation dinner until Ethan's parents reminded you. And today, you skipped my wedding ceremony for a party Olivia made up." His eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about? She told me it was a professional event the firm was hosting it." That's when my cousin Jacob stepped forward. He had arrived late, but he had been at Olivia's party earlier. "Uncle Greg," he said carefully, "that wasn't a company event. It was just a small gathering at her apartment. 15 people, maybe. Nothing official. And she admitted months ago in texts she planned it deliberately for the same day, as Amelia's wedding." He pulled out his phone and held it out. My father scanned the messages, his face paling with every line. Olivia had written, "If Dad has to pick, he'll always choose me. She'll see where she really stands." Silence fell between us, heavy and suffocating. My father's hands shook slightly as he set the phone down. "No, she wouldn't do that," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "She wouldn't lie like this." "She's been lying for years," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "And you believed her every single time." Just then, Robert appeared at my side. Calm, composed, he extended a hand to my father. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Robert Harris." My father ignored his hand, his voice sharp with anger. "So you're the one who thought he could replace me?" Robert's reply was steady, unshaken. "I didn't replace you, Mr. Parker. I stood beside your daughter because she asked me to, because she deserved someone who would show up for her when it mattered." "You don't get to lecture me about being a father," my dad snapped. Robert's gaze didn't waver. "Being a father isn't about titles or blood, it's about presence. And today, when Amelia needed you, you weren't there." The words landed like a blow. My father's anger faltered, his shoulders sagging under the weight of truth. He glanced at me, eyes filled with something between shame and desperation, then turned abruptly and strode out of the ballroom. The doors slammed behind him, leaving a ripple of whispers in his wake. For a long moment, I stood frozen, the sound of my heartbeat louder than the music. Then Ethan appeared, slipping his arm around me. "Are you okay?" he whispered. I nodded, though my chest ached. I just wish he had seen through her sooner. Robert's steady presence beside me was a quiet anchor. "The truth always comes out, Amelia. Tonight may be painful, but it's also a beginning." And though the rest of the evening carried laughter, sparklers, and celebration, I couldn't shake the feeling that the confrontation was only the start of something larger, that the fallout from Olivia's lies had only just begun. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. Guests tried to pull me back into the rhythm of celebration, dancing, laughter, sparklers glowing in the night. But my mind kept replaying the confrontation. My father's face, pale with realization, his eyes scanning those damning text messages. The slam of the ballroom doors as he left. Later that night, after Ethan and I drove away under a tunnel of sparklers, I sat in the quiet of the car, dress pooled around me, bouquet clutched in my lap, and felt the weight of it all. For years I had wondered if I was exaggerating Olivia's manipulations, if maybe I was the problem. But now, in black and white, the truth had been laid bare. She had been pulling strings for over a decade, and my father had been her willing puppet. On our honeymoon in Greece, the beauty of the cliffs and the sea gave me distance, but not escape. Each morning, Ethan and I would explore ancient ruins. Each evening we'd share dinner by candlelight. But when I lay awake at night, I thought about the wreckage waiting back home. By the time we returned, reality was impossible to ignore. 5 new voicemails from my father sat on my phone, each one more desperate than the last. The final message nearly broke me. His voice cracked as he admitted, "You were right. I confronted Olivia, and she confessed. She admitted she lied to me about you for years. She told me you didn't want me in your life, that you thought I was an embarrassment. I believed her. I can't believe how blind I was. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging for a chance to make it right." Olivia, in contrast, went silent. No apology, no explanation, only a single email. "I'm stepping away from family drama for a while. I'll be travelling for work," as if vanishing could erase what she'd done. I sat on the couch listening to my father's words, Ethan's hand wrapped around mine. Part of me felt vindicated. The truth was finally undeniable. But another part of me grieved, not just for the years lost, but for the little girl who had worshipped her father, never realising he would choose blindness over her time and time again. I knew then that the easy part was over. The lies had been exposed, but the question of what to do with that truth, whether to cut ties for good or to let him try to rebuild, was a battle I wasn't ready to face. Not yet. For weeks after the wedding, my father's messages sat on my phone like unanswered questions. Some nights I would listen to them again, hearing the cracks in his voice, the sorrow that sounded almost foreign coming from a man who had always carried himself with such authority. And still, I hesitated. Words were easy. Regret could be spoken in a moment. But rebuilding trust, that would take more than apologies. It was Robert, as usual, who gave me clarity without forcing my hand. Over one of our Sunday calls, he said gently, "Forgiveness isn't about excusing the past. It's about freeing yourself from carrying it like a stone. But the choice to let someone back into your life, that's yours alone. Don't confuse one for the other." A week later, I finally dialed my father's number. We agreed to meet halfway, at a small cafe along the highway. When I arrived, he was already there, seated by the window. He looked older, smaller somehow, as though the weight of his mistakes had carved years into his face. He stood when he saw me, but the hug he offered was hesitant, like he was unsure if he was allowed. I sat across from him, coffee between us, silence stretching. Finally, he spoke. "Amelia, I don't even know where to begin. I failed you, over and over again. I thought I was protecting myself from grief, but all I did was abandon you to carry yours alone." I let him talk, years of excuses and confessions pouring out. He admitted how he had relied on Olivia to be his bridge to me after Mum died, how he clung to her version of things because it was easier than confronting his own absence. He said he believed her lies because they were convenient, because facing the truth would mean facing his guilt. My voice shook when I finally responded. "Do you know how many nights I sat alone, wondering why I wasn't enough for you? Why every milestone, every achievement, seemed to matter less than Olivia's shadow? You chose to believe the worst of me, Dad, and that broke something I can't just stitch back together with one conversation." His eyes brimmed with tears he didn't bother to hide. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me today or tomorrow. But if you'll let me, I want to try. I want to be in your life again, however you'll allow it." For the first time in years, I believed he meant it. Still, I kept my guard. If we do this, it will be slow. Calls, visits, no more lies, no more excuses. You show up, or you don't. Get another chance. He nodded quickly, as though grateful for any foothold. "I'll show up, Amelia, I promise you that." And so began the slow work of reconciliation. Weekly phone calls turned into dinners. Then, 3 months later, he asked if he could host a meal and invite Ethan's parents, and Robert. It was awkward at first, a room full of unspoken tension, but as the night wore on, I saw my father glance at Robert with something that looked like respect. After dinner, I overheard him quietly say, "Thank you for being there when I wasn't. Walking her down the aisle should have been my privilege, but you did it with more honour than I deserved." Robert's reply was simple. "She is remarkable. Be proud of her, not because you feel guilty, but because she earned it." That night, for the first time in years, I felt the faintest possibility that my father could change. Not erase the past, but maybe finally start to atone for it. Still, Olivia remained a shadow, distant and silent, refusing to face what she had done. And though her absence brought its own kind of peace, I couldn't help but wonder if the reckoning with her was still waiting somewhere ahead. 6 months after the wedding, Ethan and I hosted our first Thanksgiving dinner as a married couple. Our small apartment was filled with the sound of clinking glasses, bursts of laughter, and the kind of warmth I had once thought only belonged in childhood memories. Around the table sat Ethan's parents, Robert, a few close friends, and this time, my father. The air carried a quiet tension at first, but it dissolved as the evening went on. My father carved the turkey, Ethan poured the wine, Linda and Mark bickered playfully over the gravy boat. It was ordinary, and yet for me it felt extraordinary. When it came time to share what we were thankful for, my father cleared his throat. His voice wavered as he said, "I am thankful for second chances, and for a daughter whose capacity for forgiveness humbles me every single day." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. Robert raised his glass next. "I am thankful for family that is chosen as much as it is given, and for the reminder that love and loyalty matter more than blood." As glasses clinked, I realised something had shifted. For so long I had been defined by absence, by my father's neglect, by Olivia's sabotage, by the ache of never being enough. But now I was surrounded by people who had chosen me, not out of duty, but out of love. That was what family was meant to be. Olivia remained distant, sending nothing more than a curt holiday card with her name scrawled at the bottom. No apology, no acknowledgement of the destruction she had caused. And for the first time, I didn't ache for her presence. I felt relief. Some doors once closed should stay that way. Looking back, I see now that my wedding was never about who failed to show up. It was about who did. Robert's steady arm walking me down the aisle, Ethan's unwavering eyes waiting at the altar, Linda's tears, Mark's jokes, my friends cheering as if I were the only bride to ever live. Those were the people who mattered. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about excusing the harm done. It's about releasing yourself from the burden of carrying it forever. I chose to forgive my father, but with boundaries. I chose to let go of Olivia, because holding on would only tether me to pain. And in that choice, I found freedom. When I think of that walk down the aisle now, I don't picture an empty seat. I picture Robert's proud smile, Ethan's tearful joy, and the realisation that family is not always written in bloodlines. Sometimes, family is the people who show up, who hold your hand when the world falls apart, who remind you that you are worthy of love no matter who tried to convince you otherwise. That truth has become my anchor. The little girl who once begged for her father's attention has grown into a woman who understands her worth. And while I will always carry the scars of betrayal, I carry something stronger alongside them, proof that chosen love can heal even the deepest wounds. And that's how my wedding day, nearly ruined by betrayal, became the turning point that redefined family for me. I learned that sometimes the people who truly stand by you aren't the ones tied to you by blood, but the ones who choose to show up when it matters most. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your own experiences with family, forgiveness, or finding strength in the people who truly choose you. And remember, every week we bring you new family drama stories that might just make yours seem a little less unbelievable.